r/NoSleep. Posted by u/JTB685. On my 32nd birthday, I decided to become an orphan. This whole damn mess started with a nightmare. An awful, twisted nightmare that set me on the path back to the town I grew up in. Back to her. See, I've never been what you'd call a mama's boy. I left home at 17 with no real purpose or direction to travel the world, all in an attempt to put as much distance between me and the lady who birthed me as possible. Years passed. I floated from place to place, happily forgetting most of my childhood. Apparently, that's common for people who suffered through a traumatic upbringing. It's called memory suppression. Or so my therapist tells me anyway. Throughout all that time, though, my dad and I remained close. I'd call him once a week to check everything was alright. He was a great guy. It tore me up not seeing him for all those years. In my youth, before I understood the real reason he was staying put, I tried convincing him to leave his wife behind. To come with me. "I'm sorry," he'd say, "but I can't. My place is here. With your mother. Just remember to call home once in a while." I always thought he was clinging to a memory of how she was before. Of the person she used to be. It wasn't until much later the real reason became clear. I had no intention of ever returning home. But then the weeks leading up to my 32nd birthday were marked by a strange occurrence. I was lying in bed, one arm resting against my head, when I heard a crash loud enough to wake me. Footsteps crept across the room, getting louder and closer. The only source of light was a thin slither of moonlight peeking through the curtains to my left-hand side. I couldn't move or speak. I felt pressure against my legs as something climbed up on the bed. All I could do is stare at the ceiling, my heart rate rising. The thing stopped on top of my chest. With great effort, I craned my neck to look down, expecting to find a demonic figure or giant rat. But it wasn't any of those things. It was Marshmallow, the cat I had when I was 8 years old. "Marshmallow?" I said, a little confused. He purred. Marshmallow was all black save for a tuft of white fur in the middle of his chest. He was wearing the same green collar he had on the night he disappeared. He brushed his face against mine, bringing me out of my paralysis. I sat up and reached over to pick him up, but before I could he ran to the far end of the room. There, he looked back, then passed right through the door. I threw off the covers and swung my feet off the bed. Marshmallow was waiting at the end of the dim hall. I followed him down the stairs, through the living room, and out the front door. The world outside my house was all wrong. Instead of facing a row of identical houses, it faced a bare field, completely flat and covered with snow. Beyond the field lay a ruler-straight highway, and beyond that stood a maze of skeletal trees. At the time I didn't think much of it. Marshmallow was a shadow in the distance. After pulling on a winter jacket and pair of snow boots, I charged onto the road, calling his name. I passed one house after another, each separated by entire fields. A stiff breeze chilled my face. Overhead, dark storm clouds swirled in the night sky. My breath fogged up as I jogged along, passing weirdly familiar landmarks, a frozen pond, a concrete bridge. Then it dawned on me, I was on the road that skirted the town I grew up in. I was home. Or close to it, at least. I wanted to turn back but couldn't. It was like I was watching a movie. One I couldn't switch off. Marshmallow walked along the highway, looking back every now and then, traveling towards a group of flashing lights. As they drew closer, I realized they were from 2 police cars and an ambulance. Marshmallow had led me to the scene of a hideous accident. An 18-wheeler sat at a crooked angle, at least 30 feet of tire tracks to its rear. Jagged bits of metal littered the asphalt. All the vehicles were empty. I continued past the ambulance towards the nose of the truck, only to discover the remains of a car, bent out of shape like a crushed tin can. Marshmallow had vanished. I searched around until there came a startling caw sound. It damn near gave me a heart attack. Resting on the bare branches of a nearby apple tree was a murder of crows. I pressed a hand against my chest and sighed. The wind picked up a little, swaying the branches. A few crows changed trees. All of a sudden Marshmallow bolted between my legs and under the car. I ran around to the driver's side, shards of glass crunching under every step, and lay flat on my stomach. The cold ground numbed my palms. "Marshmallow, get out of there," I whispered, somewhat relieved he was still the same disobedient furball I remembered. I slid the top half of my body under the car. Marshmallow kept still. As I reached over, Marshmallow hissed, then clawed me. He scratched the tip of my forefinger, causing me to jump up and bang my head against the car's undercarriage. Crows began cawing loudly. It sounded as if they were laughing at me. I sucked my finger, then rubbed the back of my head, where a bump was already forming. Then, all at once, the crows quietened. A chill ran along my spine. "Gary," called a guttural voice. It sounded strangely familiar. I froze. "Hello?" A knot formed in the pit of my stomach. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard a bone snap. The muscles in my arms were trembling. Carefully, I spun myself around and scanned the gap between car and road. Nothing. "Gary," the voice said again, dragging out the E sound. It came from inside the car. I slid myself out. Slowly. Then I climbed up onto my knees and pressed one hand against the dented door. More bones writhed and clicked together. "Who's there?" I cried. I rose alongside the car. The knot in my stomach tightened. Before I could stand completely, a bloody hand reached through the shattered window. It closed around my fingers and squeezed. I screamed and grabbed my own wrist, my heart pounding against my ribs. I kept tugging and tugging. The horrible fingers held on with an iron grip. The crows laughed again, much louder and faster this time. I pressed one foot against the door and pulled with all my might. Then I came free and turned and tore across the "Gary." I stopped mid-step. Altogether the crows took flight. Some powerful force deep inside told me to turn around. After a big gulp, I did. A grotesque corpse lay sprawled across the dashboard. Blood leaked out of a giant crater where the top of its head should have been, streaking the face in red icicles. Even disfigured, I knew immediately who it was. As the corpse turned towards me, more bones snapped. "Gary, don't come home." A tear ran down my cheek. "Dad? Don't come home, son." It sounded as if he was speaking underwater. "Dad," I said, rushing towards the car. "I love you, son. Don't come home. Stay away." I brushed the back of his neck, my cheeks now soaked with tears. "Dad, I love you too. It's gonna be okay. Everything's gonna be okay. We're gonna..." Before I could say another word, a phone rang, and I sat bolt upright in bed. Sweat lashed down my brow as I tried to catch my breath. The phone kept ringing. When I'd calmed down enough to speak, I answered it. The person on the other end took several slow, labored inhales. "Your father's dead. Come home now." Even after all those years, my mother's twisted, guttural, breathless voice still creeped me out. It felt like I was 8 years old again. I held the phone against my ear long after the call ended. I didn't have a big, emotional reaction to the news. I just felt disorientated. Disconnected. The grief came later. When I finally set the phone down, the white receiver had a red fingerprint on its top side. I held my finger close to my face. Right where Marshmallow had scratched, there was a thin cut. I touched my hand against the back of my head and made a grimace of pain. It was all swollen. If I'd known of the chilling set of events that phone call had just set in motion, I would have stayed right where I was. Safe and sound. Unfortunately, I had a profound urge to honor my dad's memory the right way. He was everything to me. As far as I was concerned, he was the only family I had. I couldn't stay away. Even if returning home meant seeing her again. In an almost trance-like state, I started packing my things. For the first time in over a decade, I was going home. So, that's where I'll leave the story for now. You're probably wondering how I didn't see that nightmare as a bad omen. The truth is, I did. I just didn't care. For those of you who never lost a parent, I probably can't convey just how powerful my desire to return home was. You'll probably read my story and decide I'm an idiot, if you haven't already, but that's fine. I'll be telling it either way. All I'd ask is you remember at this point in my life, my memories were still hazy. The terrors I'd endured were shrouded with mist, which meant there was nothing to stop me charging headfirst into some new ones.